Hey, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and I don't retain any information after reading or listening to something once. I have to hear it or read it, I'm about to say at least 4 times before it really clicks with me. Is that a learning disability? It's gotta be, right? I don't know. Anyway, let's get into today's interview.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to helping you grow your photography skills. Raymond interviews the world's top photographers in their field to ask questions that will get you taking better photos today. Now, with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodger fan, and Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back to today's interview. I am Raymond Hatfield, host of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I want to welcome you all to what we're talking about today, which is something that is more advanced of a topic than most interviews, but you're going to get a lot out of it. This episode, we're going to be talking about branding for photographers and how difficult it is to define branding for photographers. Now, I know that this is the Beginner Photography Podcast, and there might be a chance that you don't think that you need branding, maybe at this point, right? But branding is honestly so much more than just a logo and the colors that you choose, which Sandra will talk about in this episode. And even if you don't plan on making money with photography, I really think that this interview will be one that you will still get some great information out of. However, just because you can get great information out of this branding episode doesn't mean that you are ready for this information. And if this is your first episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast, first of all, I want to thank you for being here and listening, right? But if you're not at the point to where this is something that is urgent, branding is something that is urgent to you, and you're still trying to figure out how to work your camera, then I highly, highly, highly encourage you to head over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and sign up for our free, it's a totally free video course, 2-day photography bootcamp. In those 2 days, I'm going to teach you everything that you need to know just to get started with your camera, to kind of remove that fear, pick it up and not feel like, oh, I have zero idea what I'm doing. And with the holidays coming up, knowing what your camera can do and having a better understanding of what you can do with that camera is really going to help you be able to capture memories that are going to last for a lifetime. So if you're interested in that, remember, it is a free 2-day boot camp for photography. And it's a video course. Once again, it's free. You can sign up at beginnerphotographypodcast.com and learn how to take pictures that people will gush over, okay? So if you are listening and you've already gone through the 2-day photography boot camp, and maybe you have yourself an Instagram or Facebook profile, or maybe you do charge a little bit of money for your photography, today's interview is going to be one that you are going to get a ton of information out of. And premium members, even more so. Premium members are in for a treat today, as they're going to hear extras like how branding can make you money directly, why you don't need a rebrand, which we all, I feel like photographers go through a rebrand every 6 months, but Sandra's going to share with you why you don't need a rebrand and what one question you can ask yourself today to define your brand. So again, massive interview. Let's go ahead and get on into it right now with Sandra Coan. Today's guest is Sandra Coan, a film photographer from beautiful Seattle, Washington, who specializes in newborns, family, and classic portraiture. She's been in business for 20 years and loves sharing what she has learned with others, whether it's film photography, lighting techniques, studio workflow, or the fundamentals of building a successful brand. Her mission is to help you be the best photographer that you can. Sandra, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. What an honor to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to chat with you today because we're kind of winding down the year, right? 2018, at least here in the Midwest, it's starting to get very cold. It's starting to get very snowy. And this is kind of the time in our photography journeys, if you have a business, to kind of rework a lot of things that maybe didn't work out that next year and plan for things ahead. And one of those things is branding. So today, that is one of the main things that I want to talk to you about, and we're definitely going to get into. But before we do get into that, I want to know a little bit more about you and how you got your start in photography.
Yeah, great. Well, first of all, I'm so excited because I love talking about branding. It's like one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm totally one of those dorks that like loves business and loves marketing. So I can't wait to dive into that. But the fact that I am here 20 years later and saying out loud that I love business and love marketing comes as a surprise to myself and anyone who knows me. So I think I'm pretty typical photographer in that I never intended to go into business. I didn't know anything about business. I actually didn't even really ever think that I could be a professional photographer, like that was like a real sustainable career choice, you know? So
Why is that?
well, it just never occurred to me. And I kind of started my business by accident, honestly. So I've always done photography. Let me just start by saying that it's always been a part of my life. My dad was a enthusiast, and we actually had a dark room in our house when I was growing up. This was the 70s, right? So, you know, the regulations on chemicals and stuff were a little bit more loosey-goosey. So, but so I grew up around it, right? And it was always something I had. I always had a camera. It was always something I loved. But like I said, I didn't think of it as like a career option. And in the 90s, back in the day, I was teaching. I just started teaching kindergarten. And it was my first couple of years of teaching. I was paying, you know, my student loans in graduate school. I was single at the time, living in Seattle, which is a really expensive city. And I just wasn't making it on my teaching income. I was actually, as a full-time teacher with a master's degree, I qualified for food stamps those first years.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was rough, right? Can you believe? I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But and you know, at about this time, my friends were all getting married, and my good friend Ginger had just got married and was expecting her first baby. And I said to her, you know, oh, you're so beautiful. We should do a maternity photo. Now, this was the 90s. This was back before the maternity industry was what it is now, right? We were all kind of still reeling from that beautiful image that Annie Leibovitz had taken of Demi Moore, you know, remember?
Oh, yes.
And
yeah, very much so.
Exactly, right? So I said to Ginger, I'm like, oh, we should take a photo like that of you. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. So we did. And we got really one picture from the whole session that was good or worth anything. But it was really beautiful, and she loved it. And she's actually the one who came to me and said, you know, maybe you should think about offering this to other people, because there's really nobody doing it. And I love my image so much, and it might be a good way for you to supplement your teaching income. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do it. So I took that one picture and I turned it into like a postcard with my contact information on the back. And I just put it everywhere, every coffee shop, every maternity store, every baby store, everything I could possibly think of, all over Seattle. And people started calling, and which was, you know, shocking. At the time, I was like, what? But so I started there, and, you know, maternity clients led to newborn clients, obviously, and then to family clients. And so within about 3 years of that, well, it started about a year into it, I went to part-time teaching. And then about 3 years from that time, I quit my teaching job and launched my business. And so that's kind of how it happened.
So when you reached out to your friend to do that first maternity shoot, it was just being friendly. Like, hey, I have this camera. Let's just try something for fun.
Exactly. I was like, you're so beautiful and you look amazing, and let's do it. And she was like, yeah, let's do it.
Oh, that's so awesome. That is so awesome how, like, I mean, obviously it's a passion, right? It's something that you enjoy doing, and that just proves it right there. But I'm kind of wondering, like, at that point, as you were still kind of learning photography, what was the hardest part maybe about the technical side of photography for you to grasp or fully understand?
Oh my God, all of it. So,
all of it.
I didn't
you hear that, people? You're not alone.
I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I'm a 100% self-taught photographer, self-taught businesswoman, self-taught all the things. And yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. So, you know, back when I got started, I mean, I am blessed, I think, with a naturally good eye for composition. And I've always been able to see light. but I couldn't explain to you what I was doing. Like in the beginning, I don't think, I know for a fact, I didn't know what aperture meant. Like I didn't know the words. I didn't, know shutter speed. I didn't know any of it. And I learned as I went. And, you know,
Did you ever have like this aha moment of like, oh my gosh, everything is just starting to come together and make sense?
I mean, yes, but it took a long time. And, honestly, this is why I love teaching business. I actually just posted about this today in my Instagram, is the fact that I started how I did, the way I did, and am here now just proves to me that if I can do this, literally anyone can do this, because there's no reason why I should be successful.
What, you're just saying because you're self-taught, there's no reason why you should be
no,
successful?
because I was so completely clueless, at the beginning. But it is, proof that if you want this and you sit down and do the work, you can make it happen. So this, I'm just going to continue my story for a little bit, and that it might be a good segue into the business side, because I think what a lot of photographers did. I decided when I got started, I was doing maternity, building that portfolio, right? Like building newborn portfolio out, without really realizing that that's what I was doing, without understanding branding or what that meant. I was branding myself as a newborn and maternity photographer, really back before there were maternity photographers. But when I made the switch to go to full-time photography, when I quit my teaching job, I was terrified. And I needed to make money. I needed to at least make what I was making as a teacher, and hopefully more, because, that wasn't a lot. And so I decided, I looked around and I was seeing like, okay, well, what are other photographers doing? Like people who look successful, or people who seem like they're making money. What are they doing? I'm going to do that. And so doing that, chasing that, led me to shooting weddings. So what was hilarious about this story is that I'd been 3 years building this brand as a maternity and newborn photographer. And then when I launched myself as a full-time photographer, I launched myself as a wedding photographer. I'd never shot a wedding in my life,
Oh man.
I mean,
and typically
crazy.
Your past clients don't need wedding photos.
I mean, it was just absurd, But so I did that. I shot weddings for a few years. I hated it. And I had gotten to the point. So in that time frame, I'd got married. I had twins, and I was at the point where I was away from them all the time. I was working all the time. I was shooting weddings, and I just was miserable. And and as a consequence, I'd stopped doing this portrait work that I actually really, really loved. And that's what started my whole journey. And so I got to the point, I'll never forget, it was 2007, because my twins were not quite a year old yet. And I was like, well, this is ridiculous. If I'm going to keep doing this, and if this is going to be a sustainable career, and I need it to be, my family needs it to be, I've got to be happy again. And I decided to completely relaunch my business at that time and rebrand myself as a portrait photographer, go back to what I loved. And so I started there, just in time for the Great Recession. So
perfect time.
That was
perfect
great,
time to start
right?
a luxury business, yes.
I know, like perfect timing for me with like newborn twins at home. No big deal. But then, and so I kind of rebranded then, and began the what I have today. So that I got a studio, and I just decided to ignore the trends, stop looking at what other people were doing, stop comparing myself to other people, and just get really, really clear on my vision, what I do, my voice as an artist, and going with that. And
Wow.
That's also when I really sat down and decided that I needed to learn business. That was probably when I was like 8 years into that point. And that's probably when I was like, this is actually a business. Maybe I should learn what that means. And right. See, I told you, if I can do this, literally anybody can. But so at that point, I started studying and learning, and I went outside our industry and really just learned the fundamentals of business and marketing and branding. And so I was building my portrait business while I was studying all of that. And I think that's what took me to the next level, because it was
Wow.
within like a year of 2 years of that where I really broke that 6-figure mark for the first time. And it's just been going up
Even
since then.
after having been in business for 8 years, it was
Yeah.
that 1 year of really focusing on business, marketing, and branding that really took you above that 6-figure
Yeah.
limit.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit there about how when you decided to make the switch back from weddings to portraits, that you decided to completely rebrand yourself.
Yes.
So before we even get into rebranding, let's talk about branding. So I
Sure.
reached out to you, first of all, to chat about branding, because this is the stuff that I'm excited about. And when I asked the beautiful people of the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group what questions they had about branding, every response was exactly the same. It was, what is branding?
Yeah.
Or I have no idea even where to start.
Yeah.
So before we go any further, let's answer that question. What is branding?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it's something that a lot of people confuse. You know, people oftentimes think that branding is their logo or their color palette or the fonts they use on their website or their business cards. You know, like I will, you know, I do one-on-one coaching with people, and I'll sit down with people and they're like, oh, I just did this big rebrand and it's still not working. And I'm like, no, you didn't do a rebrand. You just changed your logo.
Yeah, no wonder why it's not working.
That's not a rebrand.
Yeah.
And so I do think that branding is something that really confuses people, and people don't know what it is. So what branding is, your brand is everything. Yes, it's important that you have, you know, consistent, you know, logo, color palette, font, you know, all that kind of stuff. But your branding is you. It is your style. It is your work. You know, if you have a really, really strong brand, then someone sees your image come up on their Instagram feed and they know right away that that is you.
Mm-hmm.
That is a strong brand. That's what branding is. It's that consistency in your work. It's that predictability. It's, you know, reliable. You know, those sorts of things. So it's a little more esoteric, I think, than what people tend to think of it as, right? It's, you know, it's so much more. It's your personality.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, your client experience. It's, you know, your copy, the words that you use when you are your business voice, you know, on Instagram, on Facebook, on your website. It is all those things. All those come together to create your brand and who you are. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I think what's interesting about that is that because while you were talking, I was kind of putting myself back into where I was when I first started, and you know, also assumed that branding was just like a logo and like a cool tagline, or maybe like the font that you used on your website.
Yeah.
And I think that it's easy to think those things because they're easy to check off of a list.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas everything else is like consistent editing style, you know, what it is that you're posting, and the words that you say on your website are a lot harder to define because it comes from you personally and not just, well, I bought this logo off Fiverr, now I'm ready to go.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
I
it's much more complicated than that. And really developing a really good brand too, I think, you know, it requires a certain amount of introspection and, you know, bravery, because, you know, like my story, right? When I decided to like quit weddings, quit doing all the other things and really focus on what I was doing, what I didn't realize I was doing right then was developing my brand, coming up with my brand, you know, working, you know, with, okay, well, what is it that you do? Like, yes, maybe you're a wedding photographer, but what is your take on wedding photography? What is your style? What is your point of view? What is your passion? How does that come through in your work? You know, maybe you're a portrait photographer. I'm a portrait photographer. I'm a newborn photographer in studio, right? My work doesn't look like anybody else's work because it's my vision. It's my unique take on it. That is my brand. And my passion behind it helps create that. But getting to that point, it does take some, like I said, some introspection, some work. It's about figuring out what it is that you do, your unique take on something, your unique point of view, and then being brave enough to do it. Because there's also risk in that, right? It's really scary. It feels so much safer to look at what is on trend, what are other successful photographers doing, and do that. But unfortunately, when you do that, you just become one of many, because there's a lot of photographers who are coming that, or who are doing that. So if you want that brand that really stands out, that is instantly recognizable, that requires doing the work to make sure that you are crystal clear on your point of view, your unique take, and then you're brave enough to put that out.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a really hard question here. What is one question that we can ask ourselves that forces us to look inside and come up with an answer for us to better understand our brand or put it on our website? What is it that we're looking to do after that?
Well, first of all, to get there, you have to sit down and ask yourself, what is it that you do? What is it that you do, right? And you can't say, oh, well, I'm a photographer, or I'm a baby photographer, or I'm a wedding photographer. No, what is it that you do? That's a hard question.
Okay, Sandra, what is it that you do?
What is it that I do? I am a, studio portrait photographer who specializes in film. That's what I do. My unique take is that I don't adhere to the rules of traditional studio photography in some ways. My work is about connection. It's about soulfulness. Is that a word? I don't know.
It is now.
It is now.
If it wasn't,
but that's what I bring. So yes, I fit inside the box of studio photographer or film photographer, but I bring these other elements into it that are uniquely me. The way I work with my clients, the way I see them, the way they allow me to see them, how I pull that out of people, how I can have a real traditional setup, but still have images that are modern and fresh. That's what I bring to it. That's my brand.
Yeah, I could already tell just from the way that you described that there's just so much more information there that I now know about you and how you work and what it is that you deliver, rather than just saying that you're a newborn photographer. So thank you for giving us more of a solid understanding of what branding is.
Yeah.
So branding is obviously it's a lot of things, like we just talked about. Is there something that listeners can focus on when they get started in branding?
Yeah. Focus on what brings you joy. Focus on what you love. Focus on what you do. The thing that almost killed me and almost killed my business was me trying to be like everybody else, which, I've already touched on. And it took me deciding, almost like blinders, like when they put those blinders on the horses so they can't look anywhere. I had to do that for myself. I had to stop comparing myself. I had to stop looking at other people and just really just focus like a laser on what it is that I love. What am I naturally drawn to do? How do I naturally want to shoot? I think, we all have different point of views. There are no two people on the planet who can see things the exact same way. I mean, that's amazing. And yet we all try to do what other people are doing.
Yeah.
If we can just focus on that unique take and just really, hone it, make it the best you can possibly make it. Just like really build your unique take and your unique vision. I mean, that's where the magic is. And it's harder to do than it sounds. I mean, it's easy for me, like, oh, follow your bliss and you'll be great. You'll do great.
No, I mean, even me talking to you right now, it's like, I feel like I've been in business for a few years and I kind of have an idea of what it is that I do, but I still struggle putting that down on paper, figuring out exactly what that is. And I know the feeling that I get when I'm at like a good wedding and I'm having fun and the couple's having fun and that everything goes well, but writing it down in a way that I think communicates what makes me unique is it is difficult. So I understand that.
Yeah. And there's different ways you can do it in your brand. So you get that concept, right? And that should start coming through in your work. Your work should show your style, your point of view, what you believe in, but it should also be infused with who you are and your personality. And then you're right. Then it's, then you write it down. Then it starts to come across in the copy that you have on your website, how you describe your work to your clients and how, all of that should be working together. And then, yes, then you tie in, a beautiful logo and a nice color palette, and it all starts to work together, right? Your words, your personality, your image, your point of view, all those other things, and that becomes your brand.
Perfect.
Mhm.
You must see like a lot of other photographers and their branding, what it is that either they send to you or just other websites that you look at. I don't know if you still got those blinders on and that you're not looking at anybody else, but are there any mistakes that you see um, well-established photographers making when it comes to branding themselves?
Yeah.
Hey, Raymond here. And if you're listening to this, it means that you are listening to the free version of today's podcast, which means that you are missing out big time. You know, if you become a premium member, not only do you unlock the full interview with today's guests, where they share so much more valuable information on how to become a successful photographer, but you also get access to the entire back catalog of past interviews with some of the world's most renowned and experienced photographers, who open up and share how they got to where they are and what they would do if they had to start all over again today. Now, if you want to find out, become a premium member by heading over to patreon.com/beginner photography podcast, or just head on over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the link on our homepage. That's it. I hope to see you there. I was really excited to ask you what are some of the mistakes that you've made with your own branding so that we know not to do, but I think you just shared them all right there.
I've made all the mistakes, friend. All the mistakes.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
As once again, as somebody who educates photographers on branding, you must hear from those photographers maybe other advice that they've heard. Is there any commonly bad information that you hear being taught about branding?
I think the worst mistake, or the okay, people I think get told that there's one way to do something, and that they have to do it this way to be successful, and that's not true. That's my belief anyway. There's no one way to do it, right? We're all like special little rainbows. Everybody's a little different. Just go with it. So actually, just to talk about this for a second, if I can go off on another thing like I do.
I love them, yeah.
My assistant and I were laughing yesterday because I was attempting to do like an Instagram story, and I was showing like a lighting setup and all this stuff. And, I got stuck inside the softbox, and I was tripping over things, and I got tangled in my camera strap and my light meter strap and all this stuff. And I realized like I do that like all the time. Like I'm like clumsy. Like I'll be up on stage at a conference and like I'll trip over something, or I'll knock, something off the podium or whatever. That's who I am. And, she was filming all the behind the scenes, me getting stuck in the softbox and all the things. And then we got done recording it. And I was like, you didn't post that, did you? And she's like, yeah, I posted it. She's like, that's part of your brand. You're kind of a disaster. But somehow you make it work. And I'm like, okay, that's part of my brand, I guess. So it is
the most endearing. Yeah. Okay.
No, it is. Like I have bruises all over my legs because I literally run into things all the time. That's who I am. So I think, think the mistake that people make is thinking there's one way to do it, thinking that you have to be perfect, thinking that you have to be polished, just be yourself. And if yourself gets stuck in a softbox sometimes,
Post it on Instagram.
Post it on Instagram.
Yeah.
That's who you are. My lighting's really good. It's just sometimes I get stuck inside a softbox.
Well, they can be big softboxes. I understand.
They're really hard.
Yeah, it can be difficult.
It's hard to set up. Okay.
I'm sure you have one of those like 8-foot like big ones that you put right in front, right?
I do. I have a giant 7-foot one, and it's got all the spokes, and it's like wrestling with an octopus trying to get that thing up. It's terrifying.
I've never wrestled with an octopus, but I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine what it would be like. That's funny. That's funny.
Yeah.
If there was anything that like after all of this, like you're here today, is there anything that if you had to do it all over again that you would do to change to get to where you are today, but faster?
Yes. I mean, I would have, when I first started taking money from people, I would have realized that the fact that I was taking money from people in exchange for photos meant that I was in a business.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to have gone back and sat down and started studying business at that time, instead of waiting 8 years, be like running around trying to figure it out. Like the one thing. I mean,
like about business that you think is just like a really good starting foundation.
Well, understanding what true branding is really important. Understanding marketing and what marketing is, and the concept of, you know, content marketing and all of that. That's a whole nother podcast. We could do that. I could talk about marketing all day because it all goes
put it in the books.
Let's put it in the
Absolutely.
books, right? Because it's like a 3-part thing, right? You have to know what you do. That's the branding piece. You have to know who your people are. And then you have to know how to communicate what you do to your people. And that's the marketing piece.
See, if you were to ask a lot of the listeners about marketing, they would say, oh, it'd be like a Facebook ad or something that you put on Instagram or something.
Yeah, it's so much more than that. Mm-hmm.
Once again, you're kind of tying it back to being more introspective, and I think you're solidifying that idea of therapy to the listeners.
Yeah, it is.
Being
a business is like it's like signing up for lifelong therapy.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
Yeah.
It's just the truth. Yeah.
Throughout your whole career as a photographer, have you ever made, I want to know what the best investment that you've ever made in, whether it be in money, time, or energy?
Oh God, that's a really good question.
I stole it from Tim Ferriss, so don't give me the credit.
Well done, Tim Ferriss. I think for me, for my work personally, learning how to use lighting. I was terrified of lighting for so long, and I would just like tell everybody I was a natural light photographer, and I was kind of smug about it, but really that was just code for I actually don't know how to use lights and they terrify me.
Right.
And when I just like got over myself and decided to learn it like changed my life. So learning that, yeah, really worth it.
When was that? How long ago?
Probably like 7, 8 years ago. I mean, are you noticing a trend with me, by the way, where I spend like a ridiculous amount of time just trying to figure it out on my own, and then I'm like, oh, I guess I should actually just like learn that, and then it changes my life. Yeah. So learn from me and don't spend all that time trying to figure it out on your own. Just
don't you wish you could just like know right now, like what is it that I'm not paying attention to right now? Because that's probably the most important thing.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
That's
absolutely.
Funny. Well, Sandra, I got to say, everything that you've shared today has been very helpful. I'm sure not only to the listener, but to me as well. Honestly, I learned some things, and I know that I need to go back to my website and maybe do myself a rebrand and get a new logo. And no, but there's obviously a lot of questions that I need to ask myself going forward, just to work on building a better brand. And I know that the listeners picked up a whole bunch as well. So thank you so much. I got one last question for you.
Sure.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you today that you want to make sure that the listeners know?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you need more help, I have an entire website that I dedicate just to other photographers. Speaking of branding, I kind of separated, my brand into 2 pieces. So I have Sandra Coan Photography, which is for my clients. And now I have sandracoaneducation.com just for photographers. And I talk about all this stuff all the time because I'm actually, like I said, like strangely passionate about it. So there's a lot of great resources for, photography and lighting and business and all those things that you can find there. And I'm also co-owner of a company called Lady Boss Workshops, where we just kind of take this one step further. It's myself and my business partner, Elena S. Blair. And we teach about marketing and business and all these things together. And, it's primarily, that part of it is primarily focused for female photographers, because this is still a really male-dominated industry, and we want to see more women being empowered to create killer businesses that they love and that are profitable. However, that said, we have a lot of what we call bro-togs in the group too, our mantographer friends, and they are, of course, always welcome as well.
That's funny. I was just imagining like that movie, The Little Rascals from like the 90s or whatever, how they had their No Girls Allowed club.
Yeah.
What was it called? The He-Man Woman Haters or something? Like,
oh my God,
that would
so
never
funny.
fly in a movie today if you were to write that down. But
Can you imagine? No.
That's funny. Well, again, Sandra, though, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I really look forward to keeping up with you. And we're going to get you back on to talk about marketing sometime, hopefully early 2019.
Let's do it. How fun.
All right. Thanks again, Sandra.
Yeah.
Your head might be hurting right now from all of those ideas that you have running through your head about how you're going to start and put together a brand for your business and your photography. Even if you don't have a business, Sandra shared how, you don't need to be in business just to have a brand. Sandra, if you're listening right now, I really can't thank you enough for sharing everything that you did and straightening out this idea of what branding is for the beginners who are listening and myself included. I truly appreciate it, and I cannot wait to have you back on the show in the future to talk about marketing. That's another one that I think it's a little bit convoluted in its ideas. So that's it. Be sure to join me next week where our guest is answering your burning questions directly. That's right. Next week, the super special guest is, it's me. So I'm really excited for next week's episode. Again, I do take your questions, and it's going to be one that is a ton of fun. So be sure to join me next week. Until next week, I want you to get out there, though. I want you to keep shooting. I want you to step outside of your comfort zone. But most of all, stay safe, okay? No photo is worth your life. Okay, I love you all, and I will see you next week.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a review in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And continue the conversation with Raymond and other listeners of the podcast by joining the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group today. Thank you. We'll see you again next week.